A Chinese engineering testing company once certified more than 20 buildings as safe in a single day. No equipment, no structural analysis, just paperwork. And the company itself had only obtained its certification in the first place by bribing officials at the provincial market regulator. One of the buildings it signed off on collapsed and killed 54 people. That's what Tofu Dreg construction actually is, not bad concrete. A paperwork problem that ends in a rubble pile. What Tofu Dreg actually means. Zhejiang City, Jiangxi Province, summer of 1998. The Yangtze was in flood, and a section of the flood levee protecting the city failed. Not overtopped by the river, failed. The structure came apart. Zhu Rongji, then premier of China, went to look at the breach. Asked what had gone wrong, he called it a Tofu Dreg project. The metaphor is sharper in Chinese than it sounds in English. Tofu dregs are the fibrous pulp left over after the soy milk is pressed out. They hold a shape, they look solid. Press on them, and they crumble into wet pieces. A thing that resembles a wall and behaves like a sponge. The phrase went into Chinese media immediately, and it never left. And that matters, because tofu dreg is not a foreign insult aimed at China. It's a domestic accusation, coined by a Chinese premier, used by Chinese citizens against Chinese officials. When you hear it in a YouTube comment, you're hearing a Chinese political term that escaped. But if you want to understand what it means, the definition has to come from real cases. So, here are the cases. The pipeline. April 29th, 2022. Wangcheng District, on the northern edge of Changsha. Just after midday, an 8-story building came down all at once. Not a partial failure. The whole structure dropped into its own footprint, and the debris stacked 2 stories high against the buildings on either side. Inside were a restaurant, a hostel, private cinemas, and apartments. 54 people died. 9 were injured. Direct economic losses came to about 90 million yuan. Now here is where this stops being a story about a building and becomes a story about a system. Because in January 2024, China's own top anti-corruption agencies, the Central Commission for Discipline Inspection and the National Commission of Supervision, made a 4-part television special with CCTV that took this collapse apart step by step. On state television, in prime time. What that program laid out is the clearest map anyone has of how a tofu dreg building actually happens. Step 1. A local family, Wu Qisheng and his son Wu Jiyang, built 5 stories in 2012. In 2018, they added 3 more, using unqualified workers with no approvals from anyone. Worth pausing on why anyone does this. A 5-story building in a peri-urban district generates rent from 5 stories. Add 3 more and you've increased the income of the asset by more than half. And the marginal cost of doing it illegally is far below the cost of doing it properly, because doing it properly means engineers, drawings, permits, and a structural assessment that might come back saying no. The economics of the illegal extension are overwhelming right up until the moment the building falls over. That's true in Changsha, and it's true in Cairo, Istanbul, and Mumbai. What differs between countries isn't the temptation, it's whether the enforcement layer works. Step 2. The urban management team noticed. They verbally warned the family on 6 separate occasions. Exactly one of those warnings came with a formal rectification notice, ordering construction to stop and requiring a meeting. The family skipped the meeting and kept building in secret. The team's former head, Leng Jingke, later said on camera that he simply forgot about it. Step 3. 6 government inspection campaigns went looking for illegal construction between 2016 and the collapse. This building evaded all 6. The first 2 missed it because the district's administrative boundaries changed and the structure fell out of scope. Step 4, and this is the one that should stop you. In July 2020, the Ministry of Housing and Urban-Rural Development launched a 1-year national operation targeting exactly this kind of illegal construction. The Hunan Provincial Housing Department forwarded the notice 2 months late. Changsha issued its plan 6 months late. Wenchuan District started acting a full year late. And then, the district didn't inspect anything at all. It fabricated the numbers. On June 29th, it reported inspecting 217 buildings. 6 days later, that figure became 81,668. A month after that, it was revised down to 18,238. Read those 3 numbers again. They're not estimates that got refined. They're a district making up data because nobody was going to check. Step 5. The extensions were rented out as restaurants and family inns, which required a safety certification. A firm called Xiangda Engineering Testing supplied an appraisal stating the building met safe usage conditions. That firm was producing appraisals for more than 20 buildings a day without professional equipment. It had been recommended to the tenants by Wenchuan, a former deputy head of public security management at the Wenchuan Police Sub-Bureau, who was paid for the recommendation. On camera, he put the figure at somewhere between 23 and 25,000 yuan. 25,000 yuan. Call it $3,500 US. That's the price at which the last safety check in the chain was sold. And the firm only held its appraisal certification because it had bribed officials at the Hunan Provincial Market Regulation Bureau to get it. Step 6. About 2 hours before the collapse, tenants noticed cracks in the walls and reported them to the Wu family. The family thought some steel reinforcement would handle it. Nobody evacuated. That is the corruption to collapse pipeline, start to finish. Unlicensed construction, ignored enforcement, fabricated inspection data, a purchased safety certificate, and a warning nobody acted on. Concrete quality appears nowhere in it. What happened to them? 66 officials were held accountable. 20 government departments were ordered to make corrections. In October 2024, 15 people were sentenced. Wu Jiyong, the owner, got 11 years. His father died in the collapse. The unqualified designer and the 2 men who carried out the extension got up to 6.5 years each. 6 people who worked on the blueprints got between 2 years 9 months and 4 years 9 months and were banned from the construction industry for life. The company that supplied the paperwork was fined 1 million yuan. Then the officials. Zhou Zhengmao, former deputy head of Wenchuan District, got 12 years. 4 more former officials from the district and from Hunan Province got between 3 years 9 months and 5 years 6 months. 12 years for the district official, 11 for the man who owned the building. Sit with that ratio for a second, because it tells you what the court decided the actual offense was. Zhou Zhengmao's own explanation on the CCDI program is the most honest thing in this entire story. He said, "There are so many illegal buildings with safety hazards that the problem feels unsolvable, so everyone takes a chance and hopes nothing happens on their watch." That's not corruption in the suitcase of cash sense. That's an entire enforcement layer deciding the odds are in its favor, which is a harder problem and a more common one. The thing that won a prize. Now hold that against 2019. That September, Beijing Daxing International Airport opened. The main terminal covers around 700,000 square meters, which made it the largest airport terminal building in the world. Construction consumed roughly 52,000 tons of steel and 1.6 million cubic meters of concrete, and took more than 40,000 workers. It won the Luban Prize. If you've never heard of the Luban Prize, this is the piece of the picture that almost never makes it into Western coverage. It's named after Luban, the semi-legendary carpenter of the spring and autumn period, who Chinese tradition treats as the father of construction. The award was established in 1987. It's guided by the Ministry of Housing and Urban-Rural Development, and it's administered by the China Construction Industry Association. Inside the Chinese industry, it is the highest honor a project can receive. The selection rules are the interesting part. Projects have to be completed and already in operation before they can be entered, which means you cannot win on a rendering or a ribbon cutting. It runs on a 2-year cycle, with the cap in the low hundreds of projects per round. Review is done by a committee of senior technical experts. Compare that to what happened at Wenchuan. A Luban Prize entry is a building that has already been occupied and used, submitted to a panel of senior engineers who can inspect the finished thing. The Xiangda appraisal was a document produced without equipment at a rate of 20+ buildings a day for a firm that had bought its own credentials. One process is designed to survive scrutiny. The other is designed to avoid it. Daxing also took the National Quality Engineering Award and the Zhan Tianyou Award. And in 2021, the International Association for Bridge and Structural Engineering gave it the Outstanding Structure Award. That's not a Chinese body handing out a Chinese prize. Shanghai Tower took the same international award in 2016, and the Hong Kong-Zhuhai-Macau Bridge took it in 2020. So in 2019, one Chinese construction system delivered the largest airport terminal on the planet to a standard that an international engineering body publicly recognized. And in the same period, another Chinese construction system let a family stack 3 unengineered floors onto a 5-story building, while 6 inspection campaigns walked past it. Same country, same year, same industry on paper. The difference isn't materials. It's whether anyone was actually checking. If you're finding this useful, subscribe. I break down Chinese infrastructure and technology like this every week. The 2 kinds of failure. By 2008, this pattern had already been written in the worst possible way. The Wenchuan earthquake hit Sichuan on May 12th. Buildings came down across the province, including school buildings, in numbers Chinese parents did not accept and have not forgotten. The word Tofu Dreg attached itself permanently to those collapses. But there's a distinction inside that event worth being precise about, because it separates the 2 kinds of failure that get lumped together. Chinese engineers ran damage surveys across the zone and reached a conclusion that shapes everything since. The performance targets written into the seismic code were achievable, and buildings designed and built to the code broadly performed the way the code predicted. The failures concentrated where the code hadn't been followed, and where the shaking simply exceeded what the code had assumed. 2 different problems. One is fraud. The other is engineering that met the standard and found out the standard was set too low. China responded to the second one by rewriting the standard. GB 50223, the seismic classification standard, was revised in 2008 to upgrade the required protection level for schools, hospitals, and any building holding large numbers of people, along with evacuation shelters. Then, GB 50011, the main seismic design code, was revised and reissued in 2010. It raised the assumed seismic intensity for Sichuan, Shaanxi, and Gansu. It added mandatory provisions for building on mountainous sites, tightened how infill walls sit inside concrete frames, imposed specific requirements on masonry stairwells, and raised the standards for precast floor slabs and reinforcement detailing. Stairwells and precast slabs sound like trivia. They aren't. Stairwells are how people get out of a building, and precast slabs are how floors pancake when they fail. A large share of earthquake deaths sit in those two items. That's the honest version of the split. Novel engineering risk gets fixed by revising codes, and China revised them fast. Corruption-driven failure doesn't respond to codes at all, because the code was never the thing being ignored on purpose. Wenchuan had a code. The code was fine. Nobody looked. And this distinction matters for how you read any collapse footage you see. A bridge that fails under a load nobody modeled is in an engineering story, and every country has them. A building that fails because 6 inspection rounds were faked is a governance story. The footage looks identical. The causes have nothing in common, and the fixes have nothing in common either. Whether the system is learning. So is any of this changing? Some of it, measurably. The Wenchuan response was not just prosecutions. Within a month of the collapse, the district identified 7,180 buildings with illegal expansions, and Changsha as a whole found around 44,000 illegal buildings. The city went on to inspect more than 400,000 self-built structures. Those numbers are damning about what was tolerated before, and they're evidence that the tolerance ended. The legal architecture has teeth on paper, too. A completion acceptance report has to be signed off by 5 separate responsible parties. Under the construction law, a contractor stays liable for damage from quality defects across the building's reasonable service life, not just to the end of a warranty. Shanghai municipal regulations require a permanent nameplate carved into completed projects identifying who built them, with fines for developers who skip it. That's a system designed so that in 20 years, when something cracks, there is a name attached. And in May 2025, a new national project code for residential building came into force, discussed domestically under the slogan, "Good Houses." Minimum floor-to-ceiling height of 3 meters. Lifts required in any residential building of 4 stories or more. Tightened balcony safety. Explicit rules on sound insulation, heating, and air conditioning, rather than leaving them to the developer. 3 meters of ceiling height is not a safety measure. It's an admission. It says the previous standard was optimized for units per hectare, rather than for the people inside them. There's also a whole category this doesn't touch. When the property market turned, 77 developers defaulted on their debts from 2020 onward, and Evergrande alone went into liquidation carrying more than $300 billion in liabilities. What that left behind is what Chinese buyers call rotten tail buildings. Not collapsed, unfinished. Bare cement floors, no permanent water or power, delivered to families who had already paid in full under a pre-sale model that let developers sell apartments before pouring a foundation. Those are not Tofu Dreg buildings in the structural sense. They're a financing failure wearing the same clothes. And lumping the two together is the most common error in this whole conversation. Here's the honest counterweight, though. Broadcasting the Wenchuan case on CCTV was a choice. And it was a choice made about a case where 54 people had already died and the facts were unavoidable. Coverage of Chinese building failures is frequently censored rather than televised. So the CCDI documentary is real evidence that the system can turn on itself. It is not evidence that it always does. Whether enforcement follows the new code any better than it followed the old one is genuinely unresolved, and anyone who tells you they know is guessing. Both things are true. Back to that testing company signing off 20 buildings a day with no equipment. Except now you can see what it was part of. The Chinese architect Li Hu has made the point that structurally flawed buildings in China are vastly outnumbered by sound ones, and that most poorly built structures don't collapse at all. They leak or they wear out early. Less dramatic, far more common. Scale is the thing that explains both ends. Build at the volume China built at for 25 years, and you will produce the largest airport terminal on Earth and a family stacking floors onto a building that can't hold them. The same pace that made one possible made the other easy to miss. The question was never whether Chinese buildings fall down. Some do. It's whether the system can tell the difference between a building that failed because engineering hit its limits and a building that failed because a safety certificate was sold for 25,000 yuan. On the evidence of the last few years, it's starting to. 66 officials held accountable, 15 people in prison, a lifetime industry ban. The case broadcast on state television by the Anti-Corruption Commission itself. That's not a clean bill of health. It's a system that got caught and decided to say so out loud. Next time you see a clip of rebar bending in someone's hands, ask two questions. Who signed the drawings, and who inspected the pour? Those two answers separate a Tofu Dreg building from a Luban prize one, and they have almost nothing to do with the concrete. Subscribe for more of these. Tell me in the comments which Chinese project you want taken apart next.